Hello, and welcome to a Mac Moment. My name is Patty Tingle, and I'm your host. Today we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's and related dementias. So if you have a loved one, a family member, or anyone that you know or care about who may have questions about these related illnesses, stay tuned as you'll learn quite a lot about local resources and answers to some of your questions in today's program. Joining me in the studio is Carol Zimmerman with the Alzheimer's Association. Welcome, Carol.
Well, thank you so much, Patty, for having me here.
We have been thinking about Alzheimer's from the perspective of the individual, and there are, according to reports, alarming numbers of people being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What can you tell us is going on today?
Well, it's a disease that we are seeing more and more. In fact, every 66 seconds, someone will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's or a related dementia. And that is only going to progress even further unless we find a cure or an effective treatment. As our population grows older, the incidence of Alzheimer's and dementias increases. So it is a disease that right now cannot be cured, and one in which we don't have an effective treatment to stop it. And so we are going to face far, far more of this crisis and this devastating disease as the years go by.
And we have a short clip from the Alzheimer's Association website that we'd like to share with you now that speaks to the massive increase in numbers related to Alzheimer's. The numbers that we're seeing are quite alarming.
They're very alarming. As I said earlier, this is a disease that can't be cured, and it primarily affects seniors, those people 65 and older, and the older we get, the more likely we will experience Alzheimer's or another dementia. But Alzheimer's is probably the most prevalent of the diseases in which we refer to with dementia. But Alzheimer's is a disease that kills. Unlike some other dementias, it destroys the brain in various ways, and it is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. So it is something that affects our families tremendously, both from an emotional impact, a financial impact, and the stress and the toll on caregivers is enormous because, in fact, we try so hard to keep our loved ones in home, and for many families, they have to juggle jobs and caring for somebody, and it's something that, as the disease progresses, requires full-time care.
You mentioned that disease, Alzheimer's, leads to death related to dementias, I'm a little confused. What's the difference between dementias? Are all dementias Alzheimer's? Is Alzheimer's a form of, help us.
Okay. Think of dementia as a symptom, kind of like food is a big group. And underneath food, you have different kinds of food. You have meats and vegetables and grains. Well, Alzheimer's is one of those groups. It is, though, the group that was the leading cause of dementia. Most dementias are Alzheimer's. But you can have dementia, which is described as cognitive loss, usually memory, but other cognitive dysfunction, with diseases like vascular dementia, that is from vascular disease like strokes. You can have it from, there's a Parkinson's disease dementia that occurs with it. There are other dementias, Lewy bodies, frontal temporal. None of those are causes, those dementias are not causes of death. Alzheimer's, though, as a disease, is particularly caused by changes in the brain, amyloid plaques and tangles that destroy parts of the brain. And dementia is one of those symptoms. It's the one we most think about is memory loss, but there are very many other symptoms that occur, especially as the disease progresses and destroys all aspects of bodily function.
That helps me to separate Alzheimer's from other types of dementia. But as you're talking, one of the things that comes to mind is there must be warning signs. How do I know if my forgetfulness is an early warning sign?
Very good question. So Alzheimer's is not normal aging, but part of normal aging are a lot of things that might lead you to think that you have some kind of dementia. And certainly memory loss is the one we think about the most. So memory loss, normal memory loss or forgetfulness, that's a normal part of aging. Where did I put my keys? How many times have we all done that? Well, the fact that we can retrace our steps and find the keys is a normal part of aging, and it's all right that you've forgotten your keys, but you can find them. It's a little more of concern that you've lost your keys, have no idea where you've put them, and later on someone finds them in the freezer. So those things are maybe that from a memory. Forgetting someone's name when we first met. Oh, it's Patty. Well, that's very normal as well. Forgetting people you've known for a long, long time or friends that you've known, that's a sign of concern. There are other things, though, Patty, that for seniors in particular can cause some of these cognitive declines. And memory loss is one of this cognitive decline. Depression, conflicts in medication, alcohol use. Some of those things can exhibit the same symptoms. And so that's why it's so important to know the signs. And then if you are concerned, to seek out attention. There are other signs, and some of them they're not even related to memory, and people think, well, that's not a memory loss. Visual spatial, where you're having trouble, where someone's having trouble with understanding where things are in space, and when they walk, they may think something is somewhere else and trip over it. And that often leads to falls. And so that's a sign sometimes if we're having trouble, if a loved one's having trouble. All of a sudden, having trouble with things you've done all your life, and one of the most important ones is your financial, paying bills, keeping track of the checkbook. We hear the stories all the time of, well, my father, every month he took care of that checkbook, he paid the bills on time. All of a sudden, we're getting calls from creditors, and he insists he's paid those bills, and there they are, unopened. So those kinds of things that somebody has done normally and competently, forgetting a favorite recipe, knowing it from heart and not being able to do it. Things like that are signs that you ought to pay attention to.
In talking about the signs, you talk about some of these challenges just in day-to-day living that many times people will take a bill, for instance, and just set it aside. So that's not really Alzheimer's at its earliest. It's more the entire shift in behavior. Are there behavioral signs as far as our relationships with our families that we need to pay attention to?
Absolutely, and that's a very good point. All of a sudden, you're starting to see someone who's becoming angry, who can't find their words. They're lost for like, what is this? You know, and they can't come up with the word watch or microwave, and they get angry and they're frustrated. Some of those signs and that whole change in, they know, and the frustration that's causing that. But words are an important one. Often searching for that word, particularly somebody who has been very articulate in their life. That's something, but also the change in relationships, becoming angry, depressed. And again, those could be caused by other things, which is why it's so important to get early diagnosis and make sure it's the accurate diagnosis.
So the signs that we've been talking about, these are just a few. If anyone in our viewing audience wants to take a look at these, there's a list posted on the Alzheimer's website. What is that website?
That website is ALZ.org. And on there you will find a Know the 10 Signs. And that's probably the most important thing you can begin. And if you have any feeling about you or a loved one, that those might be different than normal aging for you, then it's important to seek some medical help. There's also we have a 24/7 helpline. That helpline, if you have any questions at all about, is this normal aging or should I be concerned about this? If you call that helpline, we have trained people there, who experts, social workers, who can help you with that. That number is 800-272-3900. And once again, they're there. Even the littlest concern or question about behavior. I think one of the things we do, and it's understandable, is we see some changes happening in our loved ones, particularly adult children with parents, for instance. But we tend to ignore it. We tend to say, oh, it's just the moment, or we make it kind of some excuses for it. I think without being alarmist, I think if you can start thinking about keeping track of some of those behaviors, then it might begin to fit a picture of something that needs a diagnosis.
In previous segments of the MAC Moment, we've been talking about isolation and loneliness and the impact. And we've also been talking about planning for the future and thinking about these things and having conversations early with our family members in the event that issues should arrive. Tell us, if you can, what other kinds of preventative measures should we be thinking about as families, not so much as adult children thinking about our parents, but we seniors thinking about caring for our adult children and wanting the things that they encounter in the future, caring for us, to go easy if I've done some good planning.
Well, planning is critical. One of the saddest things about this disease, Alzheimer's, is that at the moment we do not have a cure or effective treatment. So many people say, well, there's nothing I can do. Why get a diagnosis? Well, an early diagnosis helps the family do exactly the kind of planning that you're talking about. And it allows the person, while they still have lots of cognitive function, to participate in that planning, whether it's financial or decision-making about care down the road. So that's very, very important. And then you mentioned, what can you do in terms of, there isn't anything specifically to prevent Alzheimer's, but there's some very good ways to love your brain. And loving your brain is just as important as loving your heart and the rest of the things you do to keep healthy. So What we found in research is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So there's some pretty obvious things like exercise, eating healthy, and then that stimulation. You just talked about a very important factor in what happens to seniors, and that's that isolation, that loneliness, that leads to depression, that leads to less socialization, less stimulation of your brain because you're not engaging with people. So that social engagement, the things that we were used to all through our life, whether it was through work or our friends, as that diminishes, so does then the stimulation to your brain. And as that happens, things begin to decline. So getting engaged, and I have to tell you that at the MAC Center, where Alzheimer's is housed, there are so many wonderful things for seniors to get engaged in and to have that social engagement and stimulation. If you can't get out doing more things, puzzles, reading, those kinds of things that make you think, trying something new. Don't go to the same hobby you've always done. Try something entirely new that you've always wanted to do. If you've never painted, try that. If you've never put together a Lego model, try that. Things that will keep you going. And I think one of the more important things about loving your brain is protecting your head. So if you are engaged in activities, especially when you're younger, making sure you wear that helmet, making sure you do the kinds of things that don't lead to concussions or traumas.
So you've talked about some of the signs, you've talked about some things that we can keep in mind as we're thinking about caring for ourselves and loving for ourselves and our planning. And this is a lot of good information, but I didn't write it down. Can I find you? Can we have this conversation one-on-one? Where do I find you?
Oh, you can find me at the MEC Center, which is at 909 Progress Circle Drive, which is right behind the Holly Center. It's a big white building, and it's full of resources. If you come in the front door and ask for the Alzheimer's Association, I'm right there, and I'm happy to talk with you. If for some reason I'm not there, just pick up the phone and call that 800 number, 800-272-3900, and there'll be somebody right there to answer your questions, or leave a message for me, and I will get back with you about some of our programs that we have here on the Lower Eastern Shore.
Carol, when we talk about programs, you have some programs coming up in the near future. Tell us about those.
We do. We have two workshops coming up, and there will be at the MAC Center. One is on May 1st, and one is on May 8th. They're both at 10:30 in the morning. And the first one is on communication skills. How do you communicate with people who have Alzheimer's or dementia? As the disease progresses through the stages, communication becomes difficult or limited or changes because of the cognitive functioning declines. Along with that comes behaviors that are part of the disease and are maybe difficult for family members to deal with. The second workshop on May 8th is dealing with difficult behaviors. We know from talking with our caregivers that so many people find it hard to get a person with Alzheimer's or another dementia to do some tasks of daily living, like bathing, like getting in the car to go to the doctors. So we have tips and strategies. And how do you deal with some of that repetitive behavior, asking the same questions over and over, and some tools for dealing with that. So those two workshops, just give a call, excuse me, to the MAC Center, and maybe you might share that number with them, and they can make a reservation for that workshop.
So if you're interested in registering for any of these workshops, the number to call is 410-742-0505 and ask to speak with Janet Park. And that number again is 410-742-0505. These are not the only workshops that you do. You do other types of educational activities. Tell us about those.
We do. We do a number of programs. We have support groups for people who are caregivers. And we give, again, if you call that 800 number, you will find a list of those all over the Eastern Shore. We just had a conference recently of which we talked about Alzheimer's and what's going on with different aspects of that. But we also do a number of smaller workshops, living with Alzheimer's, looking at financial and legal planning. And those you can find on our website or by calling the 800 number. And we will constantly try to have those throughout the Lower Shore. So there should be one coming up soon for you.
Okay. Now, some of our viewing audience lives here in the Wicomico County area, and knowing about these services is a wonderful opportunity for them. But if their family member lives in another county in the area, how do they find out about services in those counties?
Once again, that 800 number will have services across programs and education and support group listings across the country. So if in fact you live here, but you're perhaps concerned about your mother who lives in Ohio, just call that number and find out what are the programs that are around where your loved one lives. So that's an invaluable resource.
You've talked about this 800 number as being a number to call in support. And we want to remind our viewers that if that moment comes when frustration has hit its peak and you need someone to talk to just to understand what you're going through, maybe you understand they can't fix it, but you need somebody to talk to. Will that work?
That will work. And in fact, that's probably a significant amount of the calls that we get. And they're very important calls because whether it's 2 in the morning and you've torn out half of your hair and you just don't know what to do, you're not alone. And in fact, there are a number of people going through exactly what you're going through and have hopefully some support, some empathy, and maybe some tips to help you through. There's very, very stressful being a caregiver, whether it's Alzheimer's or other kinds of chronic diseases. And sometimes we feel very isolated and trapped in that caregiving. So reaching out and just venting is perfectly fine, and we'd love to hear it.
Carol, we've talked about areas of support, but one of the things that we were talking about earlier prior to the show is changes in the law. And we've talked about, or we think about, when we think about Alzheimer's, we think about people who wander, and we're so thankful to have the Silver Alert. Can you tell us a little bit about these laws?
Yes. Silver Alert is something that the state police and local police, I believe, have when someone is reported missing driving and usually been lost, and it's because of Alzheimer's dementia. And it's for seniors, a Silver Alert. And it's a very important program, very similar to Amber Alert. And they let people know to be on the lookout for this person. Fortunately, 6 out of 10 people with Alzheimer's or dementia will wander or get lost in a car. So that's a significant amount. Right now, though, the Silver Alert program only covers people in their cars, not wandering by foot. And we are seeing a huge increase of people who just get out of the house or out of wherever they are and, of course, get lost. What's particularly disturbing about that is that, especially during cold weather, this could be a huge life-threatening event. So right now there's a EULA's law, E-U-L-A, law being proposed in the state legislature to amend the Silver Alert program to include people on foot who are wandering. So we would urge every viewer to call the state legislature, their particular state representatives, and urge them to support EULA's law. The other thing that we encourage is that the Alzheimer's Association has teamed up with Medic Alert. And it is a program where we have a grant here in Maryland to, if you have a loved one who you feel is in danger of wandering or getting lost, there's a bracelet with a code, not a name on it, and that code is put into a registry. And if your loved one gets lost or wandered, then that registry can be accessed by any first responder.
Okay, that's really good information, and we would encourage people to look into this further. Tell me, so much goes on at the Alzheimer's Association, and you do a lot of different things. You can't do it by yourself. How can we as a community help?
Oh, Patty, you are so right. We depend tremendously on volunteers in all kinds of ways. We have a huge walk each year, which starts at the MAC Center, and we use volunteers for that in every capacity. Dozens and dozens of volunteers, and we'd love your help. We would love people who have some interest or background who would like to learn how to do some of the workshops we've talked about. The workshops that are being presented in May are by a volunteer, Jennifer Marvin, from the social work department at SU. If that's something you're interested in doing out there, we would love to hear from you, and we'll get you trained to do that. Leading support groups, helping in the office, doing any number of kinds of things. We are very much a volunteer-based organization and would love your assistance.
Great. You've been watching a MAC Moment, and I'm Patty Tingle. We've been joined today with Carol Zimmerman from the Alzheimer's Association, and if you missed most of our show, we'd like to invite you to visit and learn more about Alzheimer's by exploring the website. And Carol, remind us again what that website is.
That website is ALZ, Z as in Zorro.org.
Okay.
So ALZ.org.
Okay, as we close out our show, Carol, any final thoughts?
If you have any concerns at all, if you're sitting there watching this show and you have concerns about a loved one, please reach out to someone. Don't just kind of leave it bothering your mind. Reach out, talk to somebody about those concerns, and seek some help. We are there for you, and if it's touching your life, we want to be able to help.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carol, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Patty.
And this has been a MAC Moment. If you have questions or would like to learn more and you don't have a computer, you can't access that website, feel free to stop by the MAC Center, located at 909 Progress Circle just off Snow Hill Road. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm Patty Tingle, your host. Hello, I'm Patty Tingle, host of the MAC Moment. MAC Moment is a special program of MAC Incorporated, the area agency on aging serving the lower 4 counties of the Eastern Shore of Maryland. If you would like to learn more about the services of MAC Incorporated and the many opportunities available to learn more about an active lifestyle, engaging in programs, or simply have a question about how to address planning for later in life, contact MAC at 410-742-0505 or visit our website at www.macinc.org.